The cold in the town of Redemption was more than weather. It was a stillness that settled in the bones. It lived in the hard, frozen mud of the main street, in the gray sky that pressed down like a sheet of slate, and in the polite, measured silence of the largest house on the hill. Clara Whitaker lived in that house. It did not feel like her home. It was Judge Whitaker's house, and she had come to understand, simply the finest and most recent of his possessions. The town saw the judge as its foundation. He was older, yes, his face carved from cold marble and his voice a low rumble of authority that decided property lines, jail sentences, and political futures. He had brought order, and the town was grateful for it. When he had taken a young wife, Clara, then barely 20, orphaned and hopeful, the town had nodded in approval. It was fitting. A man of his stature needed an ornament. But the ornament was not meant to have a voice. The ornament was not meant to have a will. The marriage had been a slow freezing. The first year had been marked by a rigid, chilling politeness. The second year, the year Lily was born, the politeness had cracked, revealing the ice beneath. The judge did not abide weakness. He did not abide tears. He did not abide a wife who, in his words, failed in her composure. His cruelty was not always a matter of the hand, though that had happened, leaving bruises hidden by high-necked dresses. His cruelty was a more perfect, patient thing. It was the locking of the drawing-room doors, barring her from visitors. It was the quiet, constant correction in front of the servants, the slow undermining of her confidence until she questioned her own mind. It was the way he looked at her, his eyes flat and assessing, as if measuring her flaws. Now, there was Lily. Clara knelt on the cold floorboards of the nursery, a room the judge rarely entered. Her daughter was small for 3 months, a fragile thing of sharp bird bones and skin that felt perpetually too warm. Lily had a cough, a dry, rattling sound that tore at Clara's heart. She was nursing the baby in secret. That is what the wet nurse is for. Clara, the judge had informed her, not 2 days past. He had found her, rocking the crying child. Mrs. Gable is a healthy, robust woman. You are delicate. Your humors are unsettled. You will upset the child. He had taken Lily from her arms. Not violently, just a firm, indisputable transfer of property. But Mrs. Gable was rough, her hands chapped and her manner impatient, and Clara knew, with a certainty that defied all the judge's logic, that Lily needed her. So she waited until the house slept, until the judge was in his study with his books and his brandy, and she would steal into the nursery. She would hold her daughter against her skin, whispering foolish, loving things, and pray the child would draw strength from her, even as she felt her own strength seeping away. The isolation was nearly complete. Months had passed since she had been permitted to walk the town alone. When she did, under the watchful eye of the judge's driver, she saw the whispers. She saw it in the eyes of Mrs. Potter at the mercantile, who spoke only to the driver, asking him what the judge required. She saw it in the way women she had once quilted with would suddenly find fascinating things in shop windows when she passed. The judge had been sowing his seeds with masterful care. "My wife, she is not well," he would confide to Dr. Amos, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. "The child's birth was difficult for her. Her nerves are frayed." To the preacher, he would say, "She has melancholic fancies. I fear for her stability. She imagines things. Hysteria, instability." They were the words used to build a cage stronger than any wooden door. When Dr. Amos had visited, he had spoken only to the judge, though Clara was in the room. He had prescribed laudanum for her agitation. Clara had looked at the small, dark bottle and refused to touch it. "You see," the judge had said to the doctor, a look of profound sadness on his face, "she will not be helped." That refusal had been filed away by the town as more proof of her sickness. A good wife, a sane wife, obeyed her husband and her doctor. The house staff, loyal to the man who paid them, watched her with suspicion. Every tear was a sign of her unraveling. Every moment of silence was proof of her retreat from reason. She was trapped, and the walls were made of whispers. Tonight, the cold was deeper. A fresh snow had begun to fall, muffling the already silent house. Lily had been crying, that weak, rasping cry that signaled a rising fever. Clara had managed to cool her brow with a damp cloth, her hands shaking. She was so very tired. She had not eaten, her stomach a tight knot of dread. She had left the nursery door ajar, just enough to hear if the baby stirred. She was walking down the upper hallway, intending to risk a trip to the kitchen for a cup of milk, when she heard the voices from the study below. Her husband's voice, calm and decisive. "It is arranged. Then, the sanitarium in Cheyenne is expecting her by the week's end." Clara froze. Her hand went to the wall to steady herself. The wood was cold beneath her palm. Another voice. "Doctor. Amos. It is for the best. Judge. A quiet place. Structured. She will receive the finest care, and it will remove the disturbance from your home." "And the child?" the judge asked. His voice held no fatherly concern. It was the voice he used for logistics, for the transfer of goods. "As we discussed," the doctor said, his tone smooth. "Your sister in Boston is prepared. She has raised 3 fine sons. The girl will have a firm, stable hand. She needs to be removed from an influence that is afflicted before any damage is done to her temperament." The floor seemed to drop away from Clara. A sanitarium? He was going to lock her away. He was going to put her in a madhouse. And he was sending Lily away, back east, where she would never, ever see her again. The words were a death sentence. He was not just taking her child. He was erasing Clara. He would be the grieving husband, the burdened father, forced to make a terrible choice by his wife's tragic instability. He would be pitied. He would be free. She backed away from the stairs, her breath silent in her throat. She did not run. She moved with a terrifying, sudden calm. The time for tears was over. The time for hoping he might change was over. She went back to the nursery. Lily was stirring, her small face pinched. Clara looked at her daughter, and the knot of fear in her stomach hardened into something else. It was not courage. It was just necessity. It was the simple, animal fact that she would not let him take her baby. She moved quickly, with the silent efficiency of a ghost. She took the blankets from the cradle, the thickest wool ones. She wrapped Lily tightly, layering the wool until the child was a small, warm bundle. She grabbed her own shawl from the hook on the door, a threadbare thing, worn from use. It was all she had that was truly hers. She thought of provisions, food, money. She had none. The judge kept the household money locked. Her clothing was in the wardrobe, but she could not risk the sound of opening it. She was in her nightdress and a thin robe. She tucked a small heel of bread, left on a tray from that morning, into the pocket of her robe. It was nothing. It was everything. She put on her thin leather house slippers. The house was silent. The grandfather clock in the hall below chimed midnight. 1, 2, 3. Each chime was a nail in her coffin. She did not go down the main stairs. She went down the narrow, steep servants' stairs at the back of the house, which led to the pantry. She held Lily against her chest, one hand cupped over the baby's mouth to muffle any sound. Though the child was quiet, her fever heat a terrifying warmth against Clara's own cold skin. The pantry door, the kitchen, the back door, the one used for ice and deliveries. It had a heavy bolt. Her fingers fumbled with the cold brass. It was stiff. She put her shoulder into it, gritting her teeth, and the bolt slid back with a sound like a crack of doom. She waited. 1 second, 2. No sound from the study. She opened the door. The cold hit her like a physical blow. It stole her breath. a violent, sharp intake of sub-zero air. The snow was already deep on the steps, swirling in the darkness. She stepped out and pulled the door shut, gently, not letting it latch. And then she ran. She ran from the manicured drive, past the dark, looming shape of the stable. She plunged into the ankle-deep snow, her slippers instantly soaked and useless. The wind tore at her thin robe, whipping it open, but she held the shawl tight around the bundle in her arms. She did not run toward the road. The road led to town. The town was his. She ran toward the trees, the dark, snow-laden forest that bordered the judge's estate. It was a wilderness that stretched for miles, up into the high, unforgiving hills. She hit the tree line and did not look back. The woods were a new kind of prison. The snow was deeper here, up to her shins, each step a terrible, sucking effort. Pine boughs, heavy with snow, blocked her way. She pushed through them, showers of ice-cold powder falling on her face and on the blankets wrapped around Lily. She was cold, a cold so profound she could feel her skin tightening, her feet and hands turning to wood, but the panic kept her warm, a sick, hot fire in her chest. Lily made a small, whimpering sound. "Hush, baby, hush," Clara whispered, her words lost in the whine of the wind. "Mama's got you, Mama's got you." She stumbled over a hidden root, falling to her knees. She gasped, clutching Lily tight, checking the blankets. The baby was still, too still. Clara forced herself up. Her slippers were gone, lost in the snow. Her bare feet were numb. She did not feel the ice or the sharp stones. She pushed on, deeper, always deeper. She had no destination. She only knew she had to get away. After what felt like an hour, or maybe only minutes, she heard it. A man's voice, faint, carried on the wind. "Over here, tracks. She's heading for the woods." They knew. They were coming. The panic turned primal. She was no longer a judge's wife. She was an animal, hunted. She plunged forward, reckless, branches whipping her face, tearing at her hair. She did not feel the pain. She could see them now, far behind her, back toward the house, bobbing lights, lanterns. They were fanning out. She ran, her lungs on fire, a sob catching in her throat. She was losing her strength. The cold was winning, turning her legs to lead. She came to a sudden clearing, a dip in the land. She saw the glint of ice, a frozen creek. She tried to stop, her feet sliding, but the snow-covered bank was too steep. She slipped. Her feet went out from under her. She twisted in midair, a desperate maternal instinct, turning her back to the ground to shield the baby in her arms. She landed hard. Her head struck something, not the ice, but a rock or a thick root hidden just beneath the snow's surface. A flash of white light exploded behind her eyes. The world went gray. Her last conscious thought was a single word, a name, Lily. She fell unconscious in the snow, the bundle held fast against her chest. Silas Maddox did not like towns. He tolerated this one. Redemption, only because it was the closest place to trade his pelts for flour, salt, and coffee. He was on his way back to his cabin, high in the mountains. It had taken him 2 days to get down, and it would take him 2 days to get back. His mule, weighted with supplies, followed placidly behind his horse. The snow was coming down hard now, and he had his head bent against the wind, his hat pulled low. He hated riding at night, but the storm had slowed him, and he wanted to be home, where the wind only howled outside, not through his clothes. He was miles from town, on a trail that was little more than a memory under the snow, when his horse, Buster, suddenly shied. The animal tossed its head and snorted, stopping dead. "What is it, boy?" Silas murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He pulled the horse to a stop, his eyes scanning the darkness. He lived a life where anything out of place was a threat. His hand rested on the worn wooden grip of the rifle in his saddle scabbard. He saw nothing, just the swirling snow and the black, skeletal shapes of the trees. Then Buster snorted again. His ears pricked forward. Silas looked where the horse was looking. Off the trail, near a shallow ravine that held a creek, was a patch of darkness. It was a heap of something. A deer, maybe, caught by a wolf or a drunk, passed out from the saloon. None of his business. He urged Buster on. The horse took one step, then resisted, pulling back. Silas sighed, the sound a plume of white in the air. He was a man who had cut himself off from the world for a reason. He had learned, the hard way, that trouble was the only thing men shared. But he swung his leg over the saddle, his boots sinking into the snow. He pulled his rifle free. He walked slowly toward the dark shape. "Hello?" he called. His voice was swallowed by the wind. He got closer. It was not a deer, it was Rags, a person. He nudged the shape with the toe of his boot. "Hey, you alive in there?" A woman. Her hair was fanned out in the snow, dark against the white. Her face was the color of wax. Her lips blue. She was dressed in almost nothing, a night robe. Dead, then, or close to it. He felt a familiar, dull ache. The world was a brutal place. He was about to turn away. Then he heard it. It was not a cry. It was a sound like a small bird, a tiny, gasping whimper. Silas froze. His eyes dropped from the woman's face to the bundle clutched in her arms, held there with a grip that even unconsciousness had not broken. He knelt, shoving his rifle into the snow. He pushed back the thin, threadbare shawl, then the layers of frozen, snow-caked wool blanket. Inside, he found the source of the sound, a baby. Its skin was a mottled, pale red, its eyes squeezed shut. It was breathing, a shallow, rattling breath that steamed in the frigid air. The sight of it, that small, sick face, hit Silas harder than the wind. It broke through the calloused wall he had spent 5 years building around his heart. He had lost his own, a wife and a boy, gone in a raid while he was away. He had come home to a smoking cabin and a silence that had never left him. He did not think, he acted. He touched the woman's neck, a pulse, faint, thready. He could not leave them. He could not stay. "Damn it," he whispered, to the snow, to the sky, to a god he no longer spoke to. He worked fast. His survival depended on efficiency. He pulled the baby from the woman's arms, her grip finally relaxing. He unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat, tucked the small, feverish bundle against his own chest, against his wool shirt, and buttoned the coat back up around it. The baby's whimper quieted, soothed by the sudden, shocking warmth. The woman was harder. She was a dead weight. He heaved her up, his muscles straining, and draped her, limp as a fresh hide, over his horse's saddle. Stomach down. He grabbed his rifle, pulled his horse's head around, and started walking, leading the horse and the mule into the storm. His cabin was miles away. It was an isolated place, built in a high meadow, sheltered by pines. The journey was brutal. The wind screamed. The snow deepened. But Silas Maddox was a man made of iron and grief, and he did not stop. He shielded the front of his coat with his arm, protecting the small life inside, and pushed his way home. He got them inside the one-room cabin. It was cold as a tomb, but it was out of the wind. He laid the woman on his cot. He laid the baby on a blanket near the cold hearth. He did not tend to them first. He tended to the fire. Without it, they were all dead. He worked with quick, angry motions. Shavings from dry pine, kindling. He struck a match, and the small flame caught, growing fast. He fed it larger pieces, then logs, until the fire was roaring, fighting back the crushing cold. Only then did he turn to them. He lit a lantern. The woman was still unconscious. He saw the dark, matted blood at the back of her head. He got a cloth and the last of his whiskey. He cleaned the wound. It was a nasty cut, but it had stopped bleeding. He took the baby. He stripped off the frozen, damp blankets. He found a clean, dry flannel shirt of his own and wrapped the child in it, Close to the fire, he warmed a little water and sugar in a tin cup, dipped his finger in it, and touched it to the baby's blue lips. He worked for an hour. He did not know if they would live. He just worked. Clara woke in pieces. First, there was warmth, a heavy, smoky warmth that pressed on her from one side. Second, there was pain, a dull, heavy throb at the back of her head. Third, there was fear. This was not her room. This was not the snow. Her eyes snapped open. The light was dim, flickering. A log cabin, rough-hewn walls, the smell of pine smoke, wet wool, and coffee. She saw a man. He was broad-shouldered, his back to her. He was sitting on a stool by the fire, stirring something in a small pot. A stranger. The haze cleared, replaced by a single bolt of terror. "Lily!" The word was a ragged croak. She scrambled off the cot, her legs weak, and fell to the hard-packed dirt floor. The man turned. He did not move fast. He just looked at her. His face was shadowed by a dark beard, his eyes unreadable in the firelight. He was not one of the judge's men. He gestured with his chin toward the hearth. "She's here," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "By the fire. She's breathing warm." Clara crawled, her body shaking, her head swimming, and she saw her, Lily, not wrapped in the wool blankets, but in a man's dark flannel shirt, lying on a pallet of furs. Her chest was rising and falling. Her skin was no longer blue, but a pale, flushed pink. The relief was so sudden, so total, that it was followed by a fresh wave of panic. She scooped the baby up, pulling the fur around her, and shrank back against the wall. Her eyes locked on the man. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Did he send you? Did Judge Whitaker send you?" The man, Silas, watched her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the wild, trapped animal look. He saw the fine, torn night robe, the bare, bruised feet. He was a man who understood pursuit. He turned back to the pot. "Easy, madam. You were freezing. You and the child. Found you in the snow." "Freezing?" She looked down at herself, as if seeing her state for the first time. The judge, the escape, the fall. It came rushing back. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice breaking. She clutched Lily so hard the baby whimpered. "He'll find me. I have to go. I have to hide." She tried to stand, to find the door, but her legs would not hold her. She was weak, shivering, and the cabin was spinning. Silas looked at her, then at the heavy wooden door of the cabin. A thick bar of oak was dropped into its brackets. Outside, the wind did not just howl, it screamed, a solid wall of sound and moving snow. He poured hot water from the kettle into a tin mug, then added a spoonful of coffee. He pushed it along the floor toward her. "The door is barred. The wind's high. No one is tracking in this, not even your judge." She stared at the mug, then back at him, her eyes wide with suspicion. He looked at her, his face half in shadow, half in the orange glow of the fire. He saw the desperation, the child burning with fever, and the night outside. He offered no comfort, no false promises of tomorrow. He offered only the truth of the moment. "You are safe for the night," he said, his voice flat and certain. "I will guard every step till sunrise." Sunrise was a promise kept, but it brought no comfort. Clara awoke to the shriek of the wind. The sound was a physical thing, a solid wall of noise that made the small cabin tremble. The fire had been stoked, and the man, Silas, was gone. She sat up, her head thick and aching, and a fresh wave of panic seized her. He had left. He had gone to get the judge. She scrambled to the hearth. Lily was still there, bundled in the flannel shirt, but her skin felt hotter than the night before. The baby's breathing was a shallow, rasping battle. The cabin door was barred from the inside. He had not left. The door swung open with a blast of snow and ice, and he entered, his form a dark bulk against the blinding white. He was carrying a load of firewood, which he dropped by the hearth. He did not look at her, just stamped the snow from his boots. "He said he would guard till sunrise," she whispered, to herself, to the baby. Silas heard her. He unhooked a kettle and went to a barrel near the door, chipping at the ice on top to get to the water below. "Sunrise came," he said, his voice rough. "But the world's been buried. No one is moving in this. You are safe for now." "Safe?" she repeated, clutching Lily. The child's whimper was so weak it was barely a sound. "She is burning. She needs a doctor." "There is no doctor," Silas said flatly. He hung the kettle over the fire. "And I will not be letting Dr. Amos near this child." Clara flinched. He had named the man from the study. He knew. "I heard them," she said, her voice low. "The judge, the doctor, they were sending me away, to a sanitarium, and my baby to Boston." Silas grunted. It was not a sound of surprise. He went to a small shelf and took down a dried, brittle bunch of herbs. He crushed the leaves in his palm, his large, scarred hands moving with a strange, practiced care. "He has been telling the town you are unstable for months," Silas said, dropping the herbs into a tin cup. "A man like that, a judge, he builds his case before he makes his move. He owns the doctor. He owns the law. The town believes what it is told to believe." He had heard the talk at the mercantile. He had paid it no mind. The affairs of townsfolk were like the buzzing of flies to him. But now, the pieces fit. He poured hot water into the cup. A bitter, sharp scent rose from it. "Yarrow," he said, holding the cup out to her. "It will fight the fever. You drink it." She recoiled. "I am not sick." "The child is nursing," he stated. "What goes in you, goes in her. Drink it, and there is broth on the hearth." Clara looked at him, her mind racing. He was a stranger, a hard man, living in a place of exile. He could be lying, this could be poison. But he had brought them in. He had barred the door, and he had spoken the truth about the judge. Her hand trembled as she took the cup. The tea was bitter, but warm. She drank it, her eyes never leaving his face. He watched her, not with kindness, but with a flat, assessing gaze, as if she were a piece of machinery he was trying to mend. He turned his attention to the baby. He soaked a strip of clean cloth in cool water and began to bathe Lily's face and chest. His hands were clumsy, too large for the task, but he was impossibly gentle. He did not coo or shush. He simply worked, a man performing a necessary chore, his touch firm and sure. Clara watched, her suspicion warring with a desperate, aching gratitude. She had not seen a man handle a child with such care. The judge had held Lily only once, and he had held her as he would a stack of legal briefs. His touch cold and impersonal. You have done this before," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Silas did not look up. His hand stilled for a moment on the baby's chest. "I had a son," he said. The words were flat. "Dead." He said nothing more. He wrapped Lily in a fresh, dry blanket and placed her back on the fur pallet, closer to the fire. Clara hesitated. Her body ached with exhaustion, her head pounding. She needed to trust him. She had no other choice. She saw the way he placed the blanket, ensuring the child could breathe but was still covered. "What is your name?" she asked. "Silas Maddox." "Why are you here, Mr. Maddox? Alone, in this place?" He finally looked at her, his eyes the color of a winter sky. "I used to ranch cattle, down in the territories." He looked back at the fire. "Things went bad. I came up here." The words were a wall. Things went bad. It was a frontier epitaph, a phrase that covered 1,000 sorrows, raids, drought, sickness, violence. It meant the subject was closed. Clara pulled her knees to her chest, shivering. though the cabin was warm. She drank the last of the bitter tea. The day wore on. The wind never stopped. It was a constant screaming presence that seemed to be trying to tear the cabin from the mountain. Silas tended the fire. He cooked a thin stew of salted pork and beans. He gave her a bowl. She ate, her first real food in 2 days, and the strength returned to her in a slow, warm wave. Lily's fever did not break, but it did not climb. She slept. Her breathing still labored, but she was holding on. Night fell. The cabin, which had seemed a refuge, now felt like a cage. It was small, too small for 2 strangers and a sick child, too small for the grief that filled it. Silas laid his own bedroll on the dirt floor, near the door. He laid his rifle beside it, where he could reach it. "You take the cot," he said. It was not a request. "I have to hold her," Clara said, moving to sit on the cot, pulling Lily to her chest. "You need to sleep. A person cannot stay awake forever." "I will not leave her." Silas sighed, a rough sound of impatience. "I will watch her. I do not sleep much." Clara looked at him, at this man who spoke of his own son in the past tense, who lived alone in the wilderness, who had saved her life. She looked at his hands, which had been so gentle. She was so tired. Her bones felt like water, her eyelids like lead. Slowly, she held the baby out to him. "Her fever, if it rises." "I know what to do," he said. He took the child. Lily was a tiny weight in his massive arms. He sat on his stool by the fire, the baby resting in the crook of his arm, and he watched the flames. Clara lay down on the cot. She was facing the wall, her back to him. She was vulnerable. She was terrified. But the exhaustion was a drug. She fell into a deep, dark sleep. Silas sat in the firelight, the child's warmth a familiar, agonizing weight. It had been 5 years. 5 years since he had held his own son. He had been on a cattle drive. 3 months. The longest he had ever been gone. He had ridden home, his pockets full of money, a carved wooden soldier for Daniel in his saddlebag. He had smelled the smoke from 5 miles out. It was not the comforting smell of a chimney. It was the greasy, acrid smell of a life gone wrong. He had spurred his horse, his heart a cold stone in his chest. The cabin was a smoking ruin. The corral was broken. The horses, gone. He had found his wife, Mary, near the creek. He had found Daniel in the ashes of the nursery. The wooden soldier was still in his saddlebag. He had buried them. He had sold the land, sold the herd, and ridden north. He had ridden until he found a place where the mountains were high enough and the valleys empty enough that he would never have to speak to another human being again. He had built this cabin with his own hands, a fortress against a world that only knew how to take. And now, this woman and her child were here, bringing the world back in. He looked at the baby. Her breathing was easier. The yarrow was working. The fever was breaking. He saw Clara, asleep on his cot, her face pale and stressome in the firelight. Her dark hair was matted with pine needles and dried blood. He understood her fear. He understood the judge, too. He knew men like that. Men who saw the world as a thing to be bent to their will, who saw people as tools or obstacles. He looked back at the baby. He had failed to protect his family. He had been 100 miles away while they were. He closed his eyes, his jaw tight. He would not fail this one. Not tonight. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days trapped in a single room, while the world dissolved into a howling white chaos. The tension rose. The small space seemed to shrink, amplifying every sound, the crackle of the fire, the baby's cry, the scrape of a boot on the floor. But the tension also settled. The shared danger, the forced proximity, burned away the need for pretense. Silas gave Clara privacy without offering it. When she needed to dress her head wound or use the chamber pot, he would simply say, "I am checking the stock," and would vanish into the blizzard for 20 minutes, returning covered in ice. to check on his mule and horse in their small lean-to. Clara, in turn, offered thanks in small, quiet ways. She took his sewing kit from his pack, a rough needle and thick, waxed thread, and mended the long tear in his coat sleeve where a branch had snagged him. She swept the hearth with a bundle of twigs. She folded the blankets he had used to dry her hands smoothing the rough wool. They were small, domestic acts, but they were not acts of submission. They were the actions of a partner. A fragile companionship was being forged in the heart of the storm. On the third night, Lily was quiet. Her fever was gone. She was weak, but she was nursing again. Her small mouth leapt on with a strength that felt miraculous. The relief, after so many days of terror, finally broke Clara. She was sitting by the fire, watching Lily sleep on the pallet. Silas was oiling his rifle, the snick-snick of the lever a sharp, metallic sound in the room. Clara began to cry. It was not the loud hysterics the judge had always accused her of. It was a silent, desperate weeping, her shoulders shaking. "I stayed too long," she whispered, her voice thick. "I should have run the first time he locked the door." Silas stopped his work. He did not look at her. He just listened. "He told me I was sick. He told me I was imagining his anger. He said I was an unfit mother, that I was too frail, that I was breaking." She wiped her face with a shaking hand. "And I started to believe him. I started to think, maybe he was right. Maybe I was unstable. Even when he hurt me, I made excuses. I told myself it was my fault, that I had provoked him." She looked up, her eyes raw. "I let my baby stay in that house. I risked her life because I was a coward." Silas finished oiling the rifle. He set it down carefully. He sat on his stool, staring into the flames. The wind howled, as if in agreement with her pain. He was quiet for a long, full minute. When he spoke, his voice was low, and it held no judgment. "A man like that," Silas said, "he finds the softest part of you and he presses down until it breaks. That is not your fault. That is his—" He looked at her. "You were not a coward. A coward would have let him take the child. A coward would not have run into a blizzard with no shoes. You are here. The baby is here. That is all that matters." She looked at him, surprised by the length of his words, by the simple, hard truth of them. He had not offered pity. He had offered an absence of judgment, and it was more healing than any kindness. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and the weeping subsided. The next day, the wind began to quiet. The storm was passing. Lily was cooing. It was a small, watery sound, but it was the sound of a healthy child. Clara, her heart lighter than it had been in a year, felt a sudden, strange energy. She helped Silas bring in buckets of snow to melt for water. She stacked the wood he split just outside the door. They worked together, a simple, shared rhythm of survival. She was cleaning the tin cups when Lily, on her pallet, began to fuss. Silas, closer, knelt to check on her. The baby, seeing his large, dark form, did not cry. Her tiny hand shot out and gripped his finger. Silas froze. He stared at the impossible, small grip on his scarred hand. Clara watched them, the reclusive, wounded man and her tiny, resilient daughter. And for the first time in memory, she smiled. It was not a large smile. It was a small, fragile thing, a winter flower pushing up through the snow. Silas looked up, saw her smile. He was momentarily stunned by it. It transformed her face, washing away the fear and the ice. He cleared his throat and stood, gently freeing his finger. "She has a grip," he muttered, turning away, his face suddenly warm. That night, the cabin was quiet. The wind was only a whisper. The storm was over. They sat by the fire, the baby asleep between them. The silence was no longer tense. It was peaceful. Clara looked at Silas. She saw the grief in his eyes. But she also saw the steadiness. She saw the man who had bathed her child's fever, who had listened to her confession without flinching, who had barred the door against the world. He looked at her. He saw the bruises, faint and yellowing, on her wrist, but he saw the smile she had given him. He saw the iron in her spine. The air in the cabin shifted. It became heavy, charged with an unspoken need. It was not just desire. It was the powerful, primal pull of the living toward the living, of two people who had survived, seeking warmth. He leaned forward, just a fraction. His eyes dropped to her mouth. She did not move. She did not breathe. He stopped. The shadow of his wife, of his son, rose between them. He was a man who had buried his heart. He had no right to this. He was ashamed of the simple, human longing. He stood abruptly, his stool scraping the floor. "The wind is gone," he said, his voice rough. He went to the door and pulled back the bar, looking out at the night. "The snow will be settled by morning." He had broken the spell. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, turning back to the fire, a flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. The next morning, the world was blinding white and utterly silent. The sun on the snow was a promise. And a threat. Silas's face was grim. "The storm held them off. It will not last. They will be looking—" He took his Winchester from the wall. "You need to know how to use this. I cannot be everywhere at once." He handed it to her. The weapon was heavy, solid. It smelled of oil and cold metal. It was a world away from the judge's house. "It is not a birding gun," he said. "It has weight. It has a kick, but it will stop a man." He took her out into the snow, just beyond the cabin. He showed her how to work the lever, how to load the cartridges. His hands brushed hers, his touch calloused and impersonal, purely practical. "Do not pull the trigger. Squeeze it. Slow. Aim for the center." He pointed to a dark knot on a distant, dead pine. "Try." Clara lifted the rifle. It was heavy, but she planted her feet as her father had taught her, long ago. She nestled the stock against her shoulder. She breathed out. She aligned the sights. She squeezed. The rifle's explosion was deafening in the clean, cold air. It kicked hard, but she held her ground. A small chip of bark flew from the pine, 2 inches from the knot. Silas raised an eyebrow. He was surprised. "Again," he said. She worked the lever, the motion fluid. She aimed, she fired. This time, the knot vanished. She lowered the rifle, a small, grim smile on her face. "My father taught me," she said, her voice clear in the still air. "He wanted me to be able to protect myself, before I was married." "Your father was a smart man," Silas said. He took the rifle back, a new respect in his eyes. This was not the broken, hysterical woman the judge had described. He scanned the tree line, his eyes sharp. "I am going to circle the ridge, see what the storm has covered, or what it has not." "I will go with you," she said, bundling Lily. "No, you will stay here. You will bar the door. You will keep this." He handed her his revolver, a heavy, cold piece of steel. "You know how this works?" "Yes." "Good. Do not open that door unless you hear my voice. 3 knocks, then my name. Anything else. You are ready to use it." She took the gun, her hand steady. "Be careful, Silas." He nodded and was gone, vanishing into the trees, a gray shape in the blinding white. Clara barred the door. She sat on the cot, the revolver in her lap, and she waited. The silence of the cabin was worse than the storm. An hour passed, then 2. She was starting to fear he had left her, or that he had met the judge's men, when she heard it. 3 sharp knocks, a pause. "Clara, it is Maddox." She fumbled with the bar, her fingers numb with relief. He stepped inside, his face a mask of stone. He did not look at her. He went to the hearth and kicked at a log. "What is it?" she asked, her heart sinking. "What did you see?" Silas looked up. The cold, flat look was back in his eyes. "Hoof prints," he said. "3 riders. They cut across the lower valley, not 2 miles from here. They were riding hard. Before the storm got bad, they missed the cabin, but they were headed north. They are out here. They are looking." He looked at her, and the fragile peace of their 3 days was shattered. "They will be back, and this time, they will find the smoke from the chimney." The discovery of the hoof prints shattered the cabin's fragile peace. The silence of the snow-covered world was no longer a comfort. It was a blank page on which their death sentence could be written. Silas did not hesitate. He kicked the log in the hearth, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "Get the child, now, and the blankets." "What? Where?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Root cellar." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled back a bearskin rug she had thought was merely decorative. Beneath it was a heavy trap door with an iron ring. He heaved it open, revealing a square of blackness that smelled of damp earth and frost. "He said he will guard every step," she thought, her mind clinging to the promise. "It is not deep," he said, his voice clipped and urgent. "But it is dark. They will not see it if they are quick." He helped her down the short, rough ladder into the small, freezing space. It was barely high _ 5 feet high. She huddled against the dirt wall, pulling Lily tight against her chest, wrapping the blankets around them both. The baby, sensing the sudden cold and her mother's terror, began to fuss. "You must keep her quiet," Silas whispered, his face a pale oval in the gloom above. "No matter what you hear, do not make a sound." "Silas, where will you be?" "In the cabin, mending my saddle. A man who lives alone mends his saddle. It is natural." He looked at her, his eyes hard. "They find you. We are all dead. Now be still." The door shut, plunging her into absolute darkness. The sound of the rug being dragged back into place was a muffled, final sound. She was buried. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her lips to Lily's head, whispering, "Hush, my love. Hush, my sweet girl." She could hear her own heart, a frantic drum against the silence. It felt like an eternity. The cold of the earth seeped into her, far more punishing than the cabin's fire-warmed air. Lily began to whimper. Clara unbuttoned her shirt and pressed the baby against her bare skin, offering her breast, praying the child would latch. Then she heard it. Above ground, the crunch of snow under heavy hooves. Not one horse, several. They stopped right outside the cabin. A man's voice, rough and cold. "This is it, Maddox's place." Another voice, "Smoke is fresh. He is home." A heavy boot stomped on the cabin porch. Then, a pounding on the door. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She heard Silas's voice, muffled, calm. "What do you want?" "Open the door, Maddox. Just want a word." A pause, the sound of the heavy bar being lifted, the door creaking open. "That is close enough," Silas said, his voice flat. "We are looking for a woman," the first man said. "Stole a child. Ran off from her husband. Judge Whitaker. You seen anyone? Small woman, dark hair, running in the storm." "I have been snowed in for 3 days. Same as everyone. I have seen nothing but white." "You sure about that?" the man pressed. "We found tracks, miles back, 2 horses, or a horse and a mule. Yours?" "My horse and my mule. I was coming back from town when the storm hit." Silas lied smoothly. A third voice chimed in, this one sharper. "He is lying. The tracks were mixed. One set was his, headed up. The others were different, smaller, and they stopped by the creek bed." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. They knew. "My mule lost a shoe," Silas said. "I stopped to fix it. Now get off my land. I'm not harboring anyone." "We will just take a look inside," the first man said, his voice hard with authority. "No, you will not." Clara heard the unmistakable, metallic snick of a rifle lever. There was a long, terrible silence. Lily was mercifully, terrifyingly still. "You are a bold man." "Maddox," the first man said, his voice tight with anger. "Living all alone up here, it would be a shame if something happened." "It would be," Silas agreed. "Now ride." Another silence. Then the sound of a man spitting. "He is not worth the trouble. Not for a crazy woman. She is probably dead in the snow anyway." "The judge wants her back, dead or alive," the sharp-voiced man argued. "Then we will find her. Let's check the ridge. He is just a trapper." The sound of horses moving, turning, the crunch of snow fading into the distance. Clara waited, shaking so violently she could barely hold Lily. She waited until the silence was absolute, until she was sure her own fear was not playing tricks on her. The trap door opened. Silas's face appeared, his expression grim. "They are gone. For now." He helped her out. She was stiff, her legs numb. She collapsed onto the cot, pulling the blankets around her, her teeth chattering. "They will be back," she whispered. "Yes," Silas said. He was already moving, gathering his supplies. A bag of flour, a pouch of salt, his ammunition. "They did not believe me. They just did not want to die today. When they do not find you on the ridge, they will be back. We cannot stay here." "Stay here?" Clara argued, her voice rising with a desperate, new strength. "We cannot leave. Lily is just recovered. The snow is deep. We will freeze before we get 5 miles. "We will freeze if we stay," Silas said, his voice hard. "I know these men. They are not deputies. They are hired. They are paid by the judge." "I cannot," she said, her voice breaking. "This is the only safe place." Silas stopped packing. He turned to her, his face carved from ice. "You think that man, your husband, will give up? You think he will just let you disappear? Men like that do not lose. It is not about you, Clara. It is not even about the child. It is about his name, his power. You are his property, and you have stolen yourself. He will tear down these mountains to find you. He will not stop. Not ever." His words hit her like a slap. He was right. There was no hiding. There was only running. "Where?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Deeper in, higher up, places they will not look, places they cannot easily go. We have to move until the search cools, if it ever cools." Clara nodded. A single, sharp movement. The last of her old fragile hope died. This was her life now. They prepared to leave. Silas gave her a pair of his late wife's wool trousers, thick socks, and a heavy pair of boots that were too large but worlds better than her own ruined slippers. She pulled them on, the coarse wool scratching her skin. She put on a flannel shirt of his over her own torn dress. She was packing the few things she had, the blanket, the empty cup, when her hand touched the small, damp bundle she had carried from the judge's house, her silk nightdress, the one she had been wearing. It was torn and soiled with mud and blood. She looked at it. It was the last piece of that life. That and a small gold bracelet on her wrist, a gift from the judge in the first deceitful year of their marriage. She did not pack the nightdress. She walked to the fire and, with a steady hand, she dropped it onto the logs. The silk flared, a bright, angry blue, then shriveled to black ash. She worked the clasp on the bracelet. It was stiff, but she ripped it from her wrist, breaking the delicate chain. She threw that into the fire too. The gold glowed dull red in the embers. Silas watched her. He said nothing, but a look of grim understanding passed over his face. He was watching a woman bury her own ghost. They left the cabin minutes later. Silas put out the fire, packed the last of the food onto his mule, and saddled his horse. He placed Clara on the horse, Buster, and handed her the reins. Lily was strapped to her chest, bundled in every blanket they could spare, tucked inside Clara's new, heavy coat. "The horse is surer," he said. "I will lead the mule." He did not bar the cabin door. He left it open, to the wind and the snow. There was nothing to come back to. They rode into the vast, silent pine forest. The world was a blinding, pristine white, the trees heavy with snow. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. The going was slow. The animals struggled, sinking to their chests in the deep drifts. Silas went ahead, breaking a trail, his shoulders set against the impossible task. Clara's grief, which had been held at bay by the storm and the immediate threat, now returned with crushing force. Every slow, plodding step of the horse was a step further from the world she knew. She had not just lost a home. She had lost her name, her past, her identity. She was no one, in the middle of nowhere, with a sick child and a man she barely knew. The guilt was worse. She had brought this on her daughter. She had endangered Lily, dragging her into this frozen wilderness. What if Silas was wrong? What if the judge would have been a better choice than this? The doubt ate at her, a cold, sharp thing in her stomach. They made camp that night in a thicket of pines that offered some small shelter from the wind. Silas built a small, smokeless fire, a trick he knew from his past, using dry wood in a deep pit. Clara nursed Lily, her body aching with the cold and the long ride. The baby was weak, but she was alive. That was the only thing that mattered. Silas sat on the other side of the small fire, cleaning his rifle, his face a mask in the flickering light. "She is strong," Clara said, just to break the suffocating silence. Silas nodded, not looking up. "You said you had a son," Clara ventured, her voice soft. He stilled. He set the rifle down. "I did. His name was Daniel." "What happened?" He stared into the fire, his gaze distant, seeing a different fire, a different time. "I was away, on a drive. Men came." He stopped. The words were stones in his throat. "When I got back, they were gone. My wife, Mary, and my boy. I was not there." The pain in his voice was so raw, so bottomless, that Clara felt her own grief momentarily eclipsed. He had not just lost a child. He had lost his entire world, and he had been alone with it, in this wilderness, for 5 years. He knew what it was to see an empty cradle. He knew this agony. She looked down at Lily, who was now sleeping, her small face peaceful in the firelight. Without thinking, moved by an instinct she could not name, she held the child out to him. "Will you hold her?" Silas recoiled, his hands pulling back. "No, I should not." "Please," Clara whispered. "I need to rest my arms, just for a minute." He hesitated. His face was a map of conflict. To hold this child was to invite a pain he had spent years trying to bury. But he could not refuse. His large, calloused hands, scarred from rope and steel, reached out. He took the baby. He held her as if she were made of spun glass. He held her with a tenderness that made Clara's throat tighten. He looked down at the child's sleeping face, and his own hard features softened. His grief and his longing laid bare in the firelight. He held her close, his eyes shut, breathing in the simple, warm scent of her. He held her for a long time, and Clara finally understood that he was not just protecting them. He was holding on to the last, fragile piece of his own broken life. They traveled for 2 more days, pushing deeper into the mountains. The air grew thinner, the cold more bitter. They found an abandoned trapper's hut, half collapsed, its roof caving in. It was a miserable shelter, but it was out of the wind. There was a single, rotting bunk. Silas kicked it. "You and the child take it. I will sit." "You will freeze," Clara said. "The fire is too small. We must share the blankets. And the bunk." He argued, but he was exhausted. She could see the weariness in the lines around his eyes. They lay down on the hard, cold boards, Lily a small, warm barrier between them. They had only 2 blankets, They spread one beneath them and one over them. It was not enough. The cold was a living thing, clawing at them. Sila Underscores lay stiff as iron, his back to her, but he was shivering. "Silas," Clara whispered into the darkness. He did not answer. "We have to share the heat, or we will not wake up." He turned, slowly. They were face to face in the dark, so close she could feel his breath. He was still restrained, still wounded, but the rigid separation was gone. He draped his arm over her, over the baby, pulling the blanket tight, sharing his warmth. His body was a solid, strong presence. She could feel the heat of him, the simple, undeniable fact of his life. It was an intimacy more profound than any she had ever known. They lay there, two survivors, bound by grief and necessity, listening to the baby's soft breathing between them. They were close, but their wounds held them captive. The next morning, they found the trail. Silas had been scouting ahead, and he returned, his face pale. "They are close," he said, his voice flat. "How close?" "They camped here last night." He held up a piece of sodden, gray wool. Clara gasped. It was her shawl, the one she had dropped by the creek. "They found where I fell," she whispered. "They know I was picked up." "They know," Silas said. "And they are good. They are tracking two, a horse and a mule. They know it is me." Clara looked at him, the full, desperate reality of their situation closing in. "What do we do?" "We mislead them." His mind was already working. "I will take the mule. I will head west, up the pass. I will make a heavy trail. Make it look like I am running. They will follow the mule. It is slower. They will think I have you hidden, or that you are on foot. And me? You will take Buster." He grabbed the horse's reins. "He is faster. You will head north. Follow this creek bed. The water will hide your tracks. Ride for 2 hours. Then find the Three Sisters rocks. You will know them. Wait for me there. Do not light a fire. Do not make a sound." "No," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "I will not be separated. That is what they want. They will catch you, and I will be alone." "They will catch us if we stay together," he said, his voice hard, pulling his arm free. "They are tracking two. I will give them one. This is the only way. Protect the child. Clara, go, now!" He slapped the horse's rump. Buster, startled, lurched forward. Clara gripped the reins, her heart in her throat. She looked back. Once. Silas was already leading the mule away, disappearing into the western pines. She was alone. She rode, her mind numb with terror. The silence of the forest was deafening. Every snap of a twig was a rifle shot. Every shadow was a pursuer. She rode until the horse was breathing hard, until she found the creek. She urged him into the shallow, icy water, the cold seeping into her boots. She found the Three Sisters rocks, a granite outcrop that looked like 3 women huddled in prayer. She dismounted, pulling the horse into the shadows, and she waited. She waited for hours. The sun began to dip, painting the snow in shades of pink and purple. The cold deepened. Lily began to fuss, hungry and cold. He was not coming. They had caught him. He had sacrificed himself. She was alone, and she would die here. The sound of a single horse, walking, not running, made her spin around. She fumbled for the revolver Silas had given her. A shape emerged from the trees. It was Buster. Silas was slumped in the saddle. "Silas!" She ran to him. He almost fell from the horse. He was alive, but he was bloodied. A long, dark gash ran down his forearm, his sleeve soaked. A graze on his temple was weeping blood. "Where is the mule?" she cried, helping him lean against the rock. "Gone," he gasped, his voice tight with pain. "They took the bait, 2 of them." "But you," she pointed to his arm. "One was smart, he cut wide. He was waiting for me, on the ridge." He had been ambushed. He had been forced to leave the mule, to double back through the rocks, to fight. "He will not be following us," Silas said, his eyes closing for a brief second. Clara saw the blood. She saw the exhaustion. The woman who had wept in the cabin was gone. She ripped a long strip from the bottom of her shirt. She grabbed her water skin and poured the icy water over the wound, cleaning it. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from a cold, protective rage. "It is deep," she said. "It will wait." She bound the arm, tight. Her touch was firm. He winced, but he did not pull away. They were hidden. They were alone. The adrenaline of the fight, the terror of the chase, receded, leaving a raw, quiet vacuum. He looked at her, his face pale in the twilight. His eyes were dark, filled with the violence he had just committed for her, for the child. "You came back," she whispered, her voice thick. "I told you I would," he breathed. The space between them was electric. It was the frantic, desperate need of two people who had just stepped back from the edge of death. He leaned his head against the rock, but his eyes were on her. He lifted his good hand, slowly, and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt. He leaned in. She met him halfway. They were not thinking of their pasts, of their grief. They were just alive. Their lips were an inch apart, the promise of a comfort they both desperately needed. A sharp, sudden wail cut the air. Lily, cold, hungry, alive. The sound shattered the moment. Silas flinched as if he had been struck. He jerked back, his hand falling from her face. Shame washed over him, dark and bitter. He had almost forgotten. He had almost risked everything, their safety, his own carefully guarded heart, for a moment of selfish longing. He turned away from her, his shoulders slumped. I should not have," he stammered, disgusted with himself. He was running again, retreating into the cold, safe fortress of his grief. Clara watched him. She saw his shame. She saw the old wound, the one he had lived with for 5 years, tear open. And she was not the woman who had fled the judge. She would not let him go. She moved to him, standing behind him. She put her hand on his good arm, her touch steady and sure. "Do not run from me," she whispered. Clara's words hung in the frozen twilight. "Do not run from me." Silas did not turn, but the rigid line of his shoulders softened. He stood for a long moment. The man and the rock, two immovable objects of grief. The cold was a living thing, sinking its teeth into them. Lily's cry, having broken the spell, now subsided into a hungry, insistent whimper. The child? That was the anchor. That was the only thing that was real. "We cannot stay here," Silas said, his voice rough, turning back. The shame was still on his face, but it was buried under a layer of grim necessity. "That man I met, he was the last of them, but he was not a fool. He will have told the others where he was going. They will find this place by morning." His arm was bleeding sluggishly, the dark stain spreading on the bandage she had tied. He was wounded, exhausted, and they had only one horse. "Where do we go?" Clara asked. She was no longer asking as a victim. She was asking as a partner. "Hi, there is an old mining claim, a shack. It is half collapsed, but it is shelter, and it is above the timber line. No one will look for us there. Not in this cold." He mounted Buster, his body stiff with pain. Clara handed him the baby, and he settled Lily against his chest, buttoning his heavy sheepskin coat around her. He reached down his good arm. "Come!" She took his hand and he pulled her up, seating her behind him on the saddle. She put her arms around his waist, her face pressed against his back. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the steady, slow beat of his heart. They rode as one person, a single, weary shape against the rising moon. They rode through the night, pushing the horse higher, into the thin, biting air of the high peaks. The trees thinned, becoming stunted, twisted things. until finally there were only rock and snow. The shack was a skeleton. It was a half-collapsed box of gray, weathered wood, clinging to the side of the mountain like a stubborn weed. The roof was mostly gone on one side, but a small, lean-to addition against the rock face was intact. Silas practically fell from the horse. He was pale, his breathing shallow. The ride, the cold, and the blood loss had taken their toll. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice thin. He unbuttoned his coat and handed her the sleeping child, then went to work on the horse, his movements automatic, brushing the snow from Buster's back before leading him into the most sheltered part of the ruin. Clara entered the intact part of the shack. It was a single room, barely 10 feet square, with a rusted, broken stove and a crumbling frame for a bunk. It was a tomb of failed hope, but it was out of the wind. Silas followed her in and collapsed on the floor, his back against the wall. "The wound," Clara said, kneeling. "It is fine. It is not." She lit the lantern, her hands steady. The light illuminated his face. He was slick with sweat, despite the bitter cold. He had a fever. The infection was setting in. "Silas," she said, her voice sharp. "You are sick." "We are safe," he murmured, his eyes closing. "Just need to rest." The terror returned, cold and sharp. In the cabin, he had been the strong one. Here, he was as vulnerable as Lily. If he died, she and her daughter would die here, frozen in this high, lonely place. "No," she said, her voice fierce. She would not let this happen. She was no longer the judge's fragile wife. She was a woman who had crossed a frozen wilderness, who had faced down her own ghost. She took charge. She found his pack and located the small pouch of yarrow, the herb he had used on Lily. There was only a little left. She found his knife. She went back out into the screaming wind and packed the smallest pot with clean, windswept snow. Inside, she set up a small fire in the broken stove, using the shattered remains of the bunk for fuel. She melted the snow, boiled the yarrow, and ripped another strip from her shirt. She cut away his sleeve. The wound was angry, the edges swollen and red, a dark line tracking up his arm. She cleaned it, her touch firm, ignoring his sharp intake of breath as he woke. "Be still," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. She packed the hot, wet herbs against the wound and bound it tightly. He was shivering, his teeth chattering. She covered him with every blanket they had, then lay beside him, Lily tucked between them, sharing her own body heat, just as he had done for her. He was in and out of consciousness for 2 days. He was delirious, muttering names she did not know. "Mary, Daniel, run!" Clara did not sleep. She tended the fire. She bathed his face with snow. She forced him to drink the yarrow tea. She protected Lily, nursing her, keeping her warm, her ears straining for any sound in the wind. And she hunted. She took his knife and his instructions. She found the tracks of a snowshoe hare. She remembered what her father had taught her, the simple loop snare. She set 3. The first day, she caught nothing. Her hands were raw, her heart sinking. They had no food. The second day, she checked the snares at dawn. One was pulled tight, a small, white rabbit. She looked at the small, still body. She had never taken a life, but she thought of Lily, and she thought of Silas, burning with fever. She knelt in the snow, her hands shaking, and did the bloody, necessary work. She made a thin, hot broth in the pot. When Silas's fever finally broke on the 3rd morning, he woke to the smell of it. He opened his eyes. The light in the shack was gray. He was weak, his body aching, but his mind was clear. He saw Clara, her back to him, stirring the fire. He saw the rabbit skin, stretched to dry on the wall. He saw Lily, awake, bundled in furs, watching her mother. He had been the protector. He had been the one who knew how to survive. Now, she had saved him. "Clara," he whispered, She turned. The relief on her face was so profound, it was almost painful. "You are back." "You," he started, looking at the pot, at the rabbit skin. "You were sick," she said simply. "We needed to eat." He said nothing. He just watched her. He saw the strength that had been there all along, buried under the judge's cruelty. He saw the woman who had learned to shoot, who had burned her past, who had faced him down. In that moment, the last of his resistance broke. She was not a burden he had to protect. She was his partner. They stayed in the shack for 2 weeks. The isolation was total. The world was nothing but the gray rock, the white snow, and the sound of the wind. Silas healed. His arm was weak, but the infection was gone. As he regained his strength, Clara's capability grew. He taught her how to read the weather in the clouds, how to bank a fire to last the night. She taught him. She did not have to teach him. She just showed him. She showed him how to hold Lily without the shadow of grief. She would place the baby in his arms, and his initial stiffness would melt, his large hand gently stroking the child's back. They fell into a rhythm. It was a simple, harsh domesticity. He would hunt. She would tend the snares, cook and mend. They were a family. A strange, broken, half-frozen family, clinging to a mountaintop. The connection between them deepened. It was forged in the shared silence. In the easy way they moved around each other in the tiny space. They no longer needed to talk about the judge or about Silas's past. They were living in the now. One night, the wind had finally died. The silence was absolute. The stars so bright in the thin air they seemed close enough to touch. Lily was asleep, a small, warm bundle. Clara was mending the binding on Silas's boot. He was sitting by the stove, watching her. His gaze was steady, unguarded for the first time. "You have good hands," he said, his voice quiet. "They are strong." She looked up, surprised. The judge had always told her she had weak, useless hands, fit only for needlepoint. She met his gaze, the desire that had sparked at the Three Sisters rocks. The longing that had been banked by his shame and her fear was still there. It was a low, steady ember. She finished her work and set the boot down. She sat on the edge of the cot they now shared. Not for warmth, but for comfort. He moved from his stool and sat beside her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the heat of him. "Clara," he said, and his voice was thick. She turned to him. This time, there was no interruption. This time, there was no shame. He lifted his hand, the one that was not scarred from the ambush, and he touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a touch that asked a question. She gave him the answer. She leaned into his palm, closing her eyes, a small sound escaping her throat. It was not a fire. It was a thawing. It was a slow, emotional unfolding. His kiss was not hungry. It was hesitant, as if he were tasting a food he had long forgotten. It was a kiss of grief and gratitude, of shared survival and desperate hope. He laid her back on the cot, his movements slow, deliberate. They undressed each other without haste, their bodies pale in the dim light of the dying fire. They were not two young lovers. They were two wounded survivors, their bodies scarred, hers from a cruel husband, his from a cruel world. When he finally came to her, it was with a tenderness that made her want to weep. It was a quiet, desperate affirmation of life in a place that was dedicated to death. Afterward, they lay tangled in the blankets, the only sound the soft breathing of the baby. Clara felt a peace so profound she thought her heart might stop. She turned to say his name, and she saw that he was crying. He was not making a sound. Silent, racking sobs shook his entire body. He was turned away from her, his face buried in his arm. "Silas," she whispered, her heart seizing. He could not speak for a moment. He fought for control. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken, raw. "I never thought," he choked out. I never thought I would feel anything again. I thought that part of me was dead. I thought it was buried with them. He was not just weeping for the release. He was weeping for the return of a feeling he had thought was a betrayal. He was weeping because he was impossibly alive. Clara moved. She did not try to soothe him with words. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her body against his, holding him. She held him as he had held Lily, with a simple, solid presence. "You are not betraying them," she whispered, her lips against his shoulder. "You are living." He finally turned, his face raw, and pulled her to his chest. He held her as if she were the only anchor in a storm. "You," he whispered, his voice catching, "you make me feel safe, for the first time in my life. Clara, I am not afraid." They held each other until the gray light of dawn filled the small, cold room. The peace lasted one more week, a false spring. Silas's arm was nearly healed. Lily was thriving, her cheeks filling out. Clara even laughed, a real, sudden laugh, when Silas slipped on an ice patch. But their supplies were gone. The snares were empty. The game had moved on. "I have to go further down," Silas said, his face grim. "Hunt. We need meat." He was gone all day. Clara waited, the old, familiar anxiety knotting her stomach. He returned just before dark. He was not carrying any game. His face was a mask of cold fury. He said nothing. He just walked to the fire and dropped a piece of paper on her lap. It was a bounty notice, crude, black print on cheap paper, nailed to a tree on a trail 5 miles below. Wanted for the kidnapping of an infant child. Lily Whitaker, Clara Whitaker, escaped wife of the Honorable Judge T. Whitaker, $25. And below that, a second line. Accomplice, Silas Maddox, known trapper, armed and dangerous, $50 for his capture, dead or alive. Clara's blood ran cold. The judge had not just sent men, he had poisoned the entire territory against them. He had made her a criminal for saving her own child. He had put a price on Silas's head. "Every trapper, every bounty hunter, every desperate man from here to the territories will be looking for us," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "They do not care about the truth. They care about $50. "What do we do?" she whispered, the paper trembling in her hand. "Where can we possibly go?" Silas stared into the fire. The weeks of peace were over. The hunt was on. "We cannot hide," he said. "Hiding is a slow death. We have to fight the lie."
"Fight! Fight the judge! He is the law!"
"He is a law," Silas corrected. "Not the only one. I have a friend, a man I used to know, Luke Avery. He was a deputy, back when I was ranching. He saw too much, quit the badge, and went north to Homestead. He is an honest man. He does not like men who buy the law." "North?" Clara looked at the high, snowy peaks outside. "How far north?" "Far, maybe 100 miles, past the Red Valley. But if we can get to him, if he will listen, he will know what to do. He will know how to get your testimony to a marshal or a circuit judge. Someone Whitaker does not own. Someone in Denver." It was a desperate, thin thread of hope. Clara looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her life was worth $25. She thought of the judge, of his cold, possessive eyes. If she was caught, she would be sent to the sanitarium, and Lily would be sent to Boston. She would lose her. Forever. "I am terrified," she said, her voice shaking. But she stood up. She met his gaze. "But I will not let him win. I will not let him take her." She nodded, her jaw set. "We go north. We find this Mr. Avery." They left the shack the next morning. They had one horse, a rifle, a revolver, and half a bag of flour. The journey was a new kind of hell. They were no longer just surviving. They were fugitives. They traveled at night when they could, resting in cold camps during the day. They took turns, one riding the horse with Lily, the other walking, breaking trail. They descended from the high peaks into the foothills. This was a land of failed dreams. They passed a burned-out settlement, the chimney of a sod house standing like a lone tombstone. They saw graves, small mounds of rock, and the skull of a long-dead steer. It was a stark reminder of the cruelty of the West, a land that did not care for the weak, a land where the strong, like the judge, or the raiders who had killed Silas's family, crushed anyone in their path. The sight hardened Silas's face, but it strengthened Clara's resolve. After 4 days, they were starving. The flour was gone. Lily was growing weak, her cries thin. "We have to risk it," Silas said. They had come to a small crossroads, nothing more than a few buildings. A sign read, "Sutter's Creek Trading Post." "It is a risk," Clara said. "It is a bigger risk to starve," Silas replied. The plan was simple. Clara would wait with Lily in a stand of pines, out of sight. Silas, with his beard and trapper's clothes, would go in. He would use the last of his pelt money to buy flour, salt pork, and ammunition. He went in. Clara waited, her heart in her throat. Every minute was an agony. Lily began to fuss, her cry thin and sharp in the cold air. Clara bounced her, shushing her, but the child was hungry. The wind was cutting, just for a moment, just to shield her. Clara stepped from the trees into the lee of the trading post, near the door. At that exact moment, Silas was coming out. He had a small sack in his hand. His eyes met hers, and they widened in panic. "Clara, no!" But it was too late. The storekeeper, a thin, weasel-faced man, had followed Silas to the door. He looked at Silas, then at Clara, who was clutching a baby. His eyes flicked to a piece of paper nailed to the wall, right by the door. The bounty notice. The man's face went utterly blank. He looked back at Clara. "Will that be all, mister?" he asked Silas, his voice oily. "That is all," Silas said, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his revolver. He grabbed Clara's arm. "Walk. Do not run." They were halfway to the trees where Buster was hidden. "That is far enough! Maddox!" a voice shouted. A man stepped out from the alley between the post and the blacksmith's shop. He was not one of the judge's men. He was a different breed, a bounty hunter, his eyes cold and flat, a heavy shotgun in his hands. He had seen the poster. He had been waiting. "Hand over the woman and the kid," the hunter said, leveling the shotgun. "The poster says 50 for you, dead or alive. I would just as soon take you dead." Silas moved so fast Clara barely saw it. He shoved her and Lily behind him, shielding them with his own body. "Get to the horse, now!" He did not wait. He drew his revolver. The bounty hunter was expecting it. He fired. The roar of the shotgun was deafening. The shot went wide, splintering the wooden post beside them. Silas did not fire wide. His shot was a single, sharp crack. The hunter staggered, a look of surprise on his face. He clutched his chest, then fell, his shotgun clattering on the frozen mud. Doors were opening. Men were shouting from the saloon. "Silas!" Clara screamed. Another shot, from the storekeeper, firing a rifle. The bullet sang past Clara's head. Silas grabbed her, throwing her onto Buster's back. He swung up behind her, grabbing the sack of food. "They are reloading!" he yelled. He spurred the horse hard. A bullet struck his side, a searing, hot pain. He grunted, but he did not stop. He leaned low, shielding Clara and the baby, and they galloped out of the settlement, back into the wilderness. They rode for miles, hearts pounding, the sound of the gunshots echoing in their ears. So they rode until the horse was foaming, until they were deep in the mountains again, hidden by the falling snow. He slid from the horse, his side a sheet of fire. "Silas, you are hit!" Clara cried, seeing the dark stain spreading across his shirt. He leaned against a pine, his rifle in his hand, watching their back trail. He was wounded. They were fugitives. And the snow, their old protector, was falling again, covering their escape, but also promising a new, cold hell. The snow was a blessing and a curse. It fell in a thick, blinding curtain, covering their tracks from the trading post. But it was a cold, wet shroud that sucked the heat from their bodies. Silas was a dead weight in the saddle, slumped forward, his breathing ragged. Clara sat behind him, her arms around his waist, trying to hold him upright. Lily was strapped to Clara's chest, a small, warm presence against the rising panic.
"Just hold on, Silas,"
she whispered, her words whipped away by the wind.
"Just hold on."
The bullet from the storekeeper's rifle had not been a clean shot. It had torn through his side, a ragged, ugly wound that was bleeding profusely, staining the saddle dark red. She had packed it with a strip of her own shirt, but it was not enough. "Luke's place," he muttered, his voice thick with pain and the onset of fever. "North, 2 days. Follow the dry fork. He'll be there." He was losing consciousness. Clara knew, with a terrible, sinking certainty, that he would not last 2 days. She was the one in charge now. She took the reins from his limp hand. She urged the horse, Buster, off the faint trail and into a thicket of pines. She slid from the horse's back, her legs trembling. She lowered Silas from the saddle. A terrible, heavy weight. He groaned, a low, animal sound. She laid him in the snow.
"I have to stop the bleeding,"
she said, to him, to herself. She took his knife. She unbuttoned his soaked shirt. The wound was a dark, bubbling hole. It was high on his side, near his ribs. She did not know if the bullet was still inside. She packed the wound again, this time with the cleanest cloth she had, a spare swaddling for Lily. She tore strips from the blanket and bound his chest as tightly as she could, her hands shaking. He was shivering, his skin clammy. She covered him with the other blanket. She nursed Lily, her mind a cold, sharp blade of terror. She could not rest. After an hour, his shivering subsided, replaced by a dry, burning heat. The fever was taking him. "We have to go," she said. She could not get him back on the horse. He was too heavy, too limp. She tied him to the saddle, upright, lashing his wrists to the saddle horn and his body to the cantle. It was a cruel, desperate thing to do, but it was the only way. She took the reins and began to walk, leading the horse into the blizzard. She walked for hours, her feet numb, her face raw from the wind. She followed the dry fork of a frozen creek, just as he had said. She did not know if she was walking toward salvation or a frozen grave. She walked all through that day and into the night. She did not sleep. When she stopped to rest the horse, she would hold Lily close and listen to Silas's ragged, fevered breathing. He was muttering, "Mary, Daniel, run!" On the second morning, she was on the verge of collapse. The snow had stopped, but the world was a vast, unbroken white. She saw a wisp of smoke, a thin, gray line against a gray sky. Hope. It was a feeling so painful it almost brought her to her knees. She led the horse toward it. It was a homestead, nestled in a small valley, a sod house, built low against the earth, a small barn, and a split-rail fence. It was the humblest, most beautiful place she had ever seen. A man came out of the house as she approached. He was tall, broad, with a face that looked like it had been carved from oak. He was holding a rifle. "That's far enough," he called, his voice steady. Clara stopped. Are you Mr. Avery? Luke Avery?" The man's eyes narrowed. He looked at her, at the tiny, bundled child on her chest. Then he looked at the man lashed to the horse. He lowered the rifle. "Maddox," he said, his voice rough with disbelief. He strode forward. "Silas! Good God, man! What have they done to you?" He did not ask questions. He untied Silas and lifted him from the saddle as if he were a child. "Get inside," he said to Clara. "Sarah, Get the bed ready, now! A woman appeared in the doorway, her hands white with flour. She saw Clara, saw the baby, saw the bloody, unconscious man in her husband's arms. Her face went pale, but her eyes were steady. Bring him in! Bring them both in! Clara stumbled into the warmth. It was a single, large room, clean and smelling of wood smoke and baking bread. Sarah Avery took Lily from her, her touch gentle. She's so small. You poor things. Luke laid Silas on a rope bed in the corner. He's burning up, and this binding, he's been shot.
2 days ago,
Clara whispered, her knees buckling.
at a trading post, the bullet, I don't know.
It has to come out, Luke said, his face grim. He was already rolling up his sleeves. He looked at his wife. Sarah, get the whiskey. And the knife. Boil it. He looked at Clara. This will be hard.
I will help, Clara said.
Her voice did not shake. She held Silas down. She watched as Luke Avery, his face a mask of concentration, heated the knife in the fire, poured whiskey into the raw wound, and began to probe for the bullet. Silas screamed, a high, thin sound, and then went limp, finally falling into a true, deep unconsciousness. Luke grunted, his hand steady. He dug deep. There was a sickening click of metal on bone, and then he pulled it out, a lead slug, flattened and ugly. It's out, he said. He stitched the wound with a clean needle and gut thread. Now we pray the fever breaks. Sarah Avery, who had been tending to Lily, came over and put a hand on Clara's arm. You're safe now. Let me get you some broth. Clara finally let the exhaustion take her. She sat by the fire, holding a warm cup, and she told them everything. The judge, the escape, the cabin, the bounty, the men who had hunted them, the storekeeper. Luke listened, his face growing darker with every word. He had the quiet, dangerous stillness of a lawman, even without a badge. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. I've been hearing rumors about Judge Whitaker for a year, that he thinks he owns that territory. But this, he shook his head. He's a fool. He's powerful, Clara said. He has men. He's powerful in his own small pond. Luke said, but he's not the only law. I've been a deputy for 15 years. Mrs. Whitaker. I know a forged document when I hear about one. Clara looked up. Forged?
A committal order? To a sanitarium?
That needs a hearing. It needs 2 doctors' signatures. You said doctor. Amos was the only one. And he's in Whitaker's pocket. I sent a wire to a friend in Cheyenne after I heard about that bounty. Just a hunch. He checked the territorial court. There's no record of a hearing for Clara Whitaker. None. He wrote the order. And he signed it himself. It's paper, nothing more. He's a criminal, plain and simple. A spark, the first one she had felt, ignited in Clara's chest. So it's not legal? It's as illegal as bank robbery, Luke said. But he has the power to make it seem legal. Here, anyway, but not everywhere. Not in Denver. Denver? The circuit judges are in Denver. Federal marshals. Men who don't like a small-town territorial judge getting above himself. If you could get your testimony to a real judge, Mrs. Whitaker, if you could show them what he did, they would hang him for it. Silas was sleeping. The fever had not broken, but he was breathing easier. Sarah had given Clara a clean dress, and Lily was sleeping in a wooden cradle by the fire. It was a small, fragile bubble of peace. But Luke's words had presented a new, terrifying choice. The next day, Silas woke. His eyes were clear. The fever was down. He saw Clara, then Luke. He nodded, a weak gesture of thanks. Luke told him the plan. Denver, it's your only chance. Silas, you keep running. They'll catch you. That bounty is too high. Silas looked at Clara. He set his jaw. We go to Denver. Clara, who had held the hope in her heart all night, suddenly felt it turn to ice. She had seen him after the first wound. She had seen him after the second. She had seen the bounty poster, dead or alive. "No," she said. Both men turned to look at her. "Clara," Silas said, his voice weak. "No," she repeated, her voice stronger. "I will not. Look at you. You are half dead. They shot you. Silas, they shot you because of me. If we ride to Denver, we are riding into a city full of men who want your $50. They will be waiting for us. We won't make it to the courthouse steps." "Clara, it's the only way," Silas insisted, trying to sit up. He winced, falling back. "The only way for what?" she cried, the exhaustion and the fear of the last weeks erupting. "For you to die? What if we get there and this new judge, what if he is a friend of Whitaker's? What if he doesn't believe me? I'll be locked away, and Lily will be gone. I would rather run. I would rather run to California. I would rather die in the wilderness than let them take her." "Run," Silas shot back, his voice harsh with pain and frustration. "We've been running, and where did it get us? I'm shot full of holes. We're starving, and they are still coming. You think we can make it 1,000 miles with every bounty hunter in the West on our trail? Running is a fool's game. This is the only way. We have to face him." "Face him? You'll be dead." She was weeping now, her control shattering. "He has a price on your head. They will shoot you on sight. You'll be dead, and it will be my fault. I will not be the reason you die. Silas, I will not." "And what?" he yelled, a raw, painful sound. "You think I'm just going to let him win? Let him destroy you after everything after everything?" "I am not asking you to," she sobbed. "I am telling you to go. Go back to your mountain. They want me. They want Lily. If I am not with you, the bounty on your head is meaningless. You've done enough. You saved us. Now save yourself." He stared at her, his face a mask of betrayal. "You think that's what this is about? You think I'd just leave you?" The fight hung in the air, bitter and unresolved. Clara turned and ran to the small sleeping alcove Sarah had given her. She pulled the curtain. The argument was over, but she had made her decision. That night, the homestead was silent. Silas was sleeping, a deep, healing sleep. Thanks to Sarah's broth, Luke and his wife were asleep in the main room. Clara got up. Her mind was cold and clear. She was a danger to him. He was a good man, a man who had already lost one family. She would not be the reason he lost his life. She wrapped Lily in the warmest blankets. She took a small sack of dried meat and hardtack Sarah had packed for her. She did not take a horse. It would make noise. She would walk. She did not know where. Just away from Silas. She eased the small window of the alcove open. It scraped, a soft, terrible sound. She waited. No one stirred. She dropped the small bundle out, then eased herself through the window, landing softly in the snow. She picked up Lily and her pack, and she walked. She walked into the dark, frozen woods, disappearing into the night. Silas woke near dawn. His side was on fire, but his head was clear. The cabin was still. He called her name. "Clara." Silence. He called again, louder.
Clara!
Luke stirred by the fire. "What is it, son?" Silas pushed himself up. He saw the empty cradle. He saw the open window. A cold, primal fear, a fear worse than any bullet, gripped his heart. It was a nightmare. Returned. He had woken up to an empty room, a missing family, all over again. "No," he whispered. He threw off the blankets, his wound tearing, a fresh, hot pain. He did not care. He grabbed his coat. "Silas, you can't," Luke said, seeing the tracks in the snow. "You're wounded. You'll die out there." "She's out there," Silas growled, his voice a low thunder. He grabbed his rifle and pushed past Luke, out into the pre-dawn cold. He was a trapper. He was the best. Even wounded, he could read the trail. Her tracks were small, stumbling. She was on foot, carrying a child. She was not making for the trail. She was just running. He found her in less than a mile. She had collapsed at the base of a huge, snow-laden pine. She was sitting in the snow, shivering, hugging the baby, weeping in great, silent, hopeless sobs. She had realized the truth. There was nowhere to go. She looked up as he approached, her face a mask of misery. "Go away," she cried, her voice hoarse.
Please, Silas, go back. I am a curse. Everyone who helps me, everyone I love, they get hurt. Go back."
He did not scold her. He was not angry. He looked at her, his heart breaking, not for himself, but for her, for the pain that had driven her to this. He walked to her, his side screaming with every step, and he knelt in the snow. He was pale, the moonlight washing the color from his face, but his eyes were steady. "You think I'm him?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost gentle. "You think I'm the judge, that you can just be sent away?"
"I am trying to save you,"
she whispered, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "You're trying to save me from the only thing that's made sense in 5 years," he said. He touched Lily's head, his finger tracing the child's brow. "We started this, we finish it, together."
"I'm so afraid," she wept. "I can't lose her, and I can't lose you."
He put his hand on her shoulder, a solid, warm weight. "So am I, but we do it together." He looked her in the eyes, and the last of his own walls, the last of his 5-year-old grief, crumbled. "Wherever you walk," he said, his voice a raw, unbreakable vow. "I'll walk behind you. You are not getting rid of me. Clara, not that easy." He helped her up. He took the baby, holding Lily against his good side. He put his arm around Clara's shoulders, and they walked back to the homestead. The argument was over. They would go to Denver. The ride to Denver was a journey through a frozen hell. Luke gave them his 2 best horses, a sack of food, and all the ammunition he had. "Godspeed. Silas, you'll need it." They avoided the main roads, riding through high, wind-scoured canyons, sleeping in cold camps, their eyes always on their back trail. Silas's side was healing, but he was weak. They were 2 days from Denver when they were cornered. It was in a narrow arroyo, a perfect trap. 2 men, bounty hunters, had been waiting for them.
Give it up, Maddox,
one shouted from the rim.
$50 is $50.
A shot kicked up dirt by the horse's feet.
Get down,
Silas yelled. He pushed Clara and Lily off the horse, behind a cluster of boulders.
"Stay here." "Silas, no, your side."
He ignored her. He was a good shot, but he was weak and he was outnumbered. He fired, driving one man back. The other man circled, getting a better angle. Silas saw him. He moved to shield Clara, firing as he went. The man's shot was high. Silas's was not. The man fell. The first hunter, seeing his partner drop, took aim. He fired, a panicked, angry shot. Silas cried out, a sharp, choked sound. He staggered, hit again, this time in the shoulder. He fell to his knees, but he brought his rifle up, fired one last time. The hunter on the rim disappeared.
"Silas!"
Clara screamed. She ran to him. He was bleeding. Again, he was badly wounded, but he was alive.
"We have to go!"
he gasped. As he fainted, they were on the outskirts of Denver, but he was delirious, dying. Clara was frantic. She could not ride into the city. She was a wanted kidnapper. The first marshal she saw might arrest her. She saw a light, a small church, a parsonage beside it. It was a tiny island of civilization. She made a choice. She rode into the yard, holding Silas in the saddle, and she hammered on the door. A preacher opened it. He was a stern-faced man with eyes that seemed to see everything. His wife stood behind him.
"Please,"
Clara begged, the tears she had held back finally streaming down her face.
He's dying. He was shot. They've been hunting us. Please, he saved my baby. Help him.
Reverend Gideon looked at the bleeding man, at the desperate woman, at the half-frozen child. He was a man of God. "Martha," he said to his wife, "get the bandages. Bring them in." They sheltered them. Clara, leaving Silas in their care, rode alone into the dark city. She found a doctor, a drunk, weary man, and paid him with the last of Luke's money to come. He removed the bullet. Silas was alive, but just barely. While he recovered, Clara told Reverend Gideon and his wife the entire story. The preacher's face grew harder and more righteous with every word. "This is an abomination," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Judge Whitaker is a wolf in sheep's clothing."
He is too powerful, Clara whispered.
"Not here," the preacher said. "The circuit judges are in town. Judge Harlan is a hard man, but he is a just man, and he has no love for corrupt territorial appointments." Reverend Gideon arranged it. He brought 2 federal lawmen and Judge Harlan to the parsonage, in secret. Clara, her hands folded in her lap, gave her testimony. She was not the weeping, terrified woman from the woods. She was cold, calm, and articulate. She told them everything: the locked doors, the threats, the forged papers, the escape, the hired guns, the bounty, the man dying in the next room. Judge Harlan listened, his face impassive. When she was done, he said, "This is a most serious accusation. Mrs. Whitaker."
"It is the truth, sir,"
Clara said, her voice clear.
"All I have left is the truth, and my child."
The news spread through Denver like a prairie fire. A local judge accused of forgery and attempted kidnapping. Reverend Gideon stood by Clara's side, his support a shield against the whispers. Judge Harlan acted swiftly. He issued a temporary order of protection for Clara and Lily. She was placed under the preacher's care. A summons was prepared for Judge Whitaker. Whitaker arrived in Denver 2 days later. He did not come as a prisoner. He came as an offended, powerful man, flanked by lawyers, his face a mask of cold rage. He had come to retrieve his unstable wife and his stolen child. The hearing was held in a small, packed courtroom. Silas was there. His arm was in a sling, his side was bound, and he was pale, but he was standing. He stood at the back of the room, his eyes locked on Clara. Whitaker saw her. He gave her the look that had once frozen her blood. "Clara," he said, his voice low and commanding, "this foolishness has gone on long enough. It is time to come home." Clara stood. Lily was in Martha Gideon's arms. She looked at her husband. She saw the cruelty, the arrogance, and for the first time, she felt nothing. No fear, only a cold, hard pity. "No." The word was quiet, but it echoed in the silent room. Whitaker flinched, as if she had struck him. "She is unwell, Your Honor," he said, turning to Judge Harlan. "She is a hysteric. She needs care. She has been influenced by this criminal." He pointed at Silas. "She does not look unwell to me, Judge Whitaker," Harlan said, his voice dry as dust. "She looks like a woman who has been through an ordeal, and the man she is with has 2 fresh bullet holes in him, bullet holes that seem to have come from men you hired." "I hired men to retrieve my stolen child," Whitaker roared.
"She is my child."
Clara stepped forward, her voice ringing with a power she did not know she possessed. "He locked me in my home. He beat me when I displeased him. He forged court papers to have me committed so he could give my child to his sister. He sent hired men to kill the man who saved my life. He is not a judge. He is a monster." Whitaker's face went purple.
Lies, slander. She is insane.
"Then you will not object," Judge Harlan said, his voice like cold steel, "to a full federal investigation of your court documents, your ledgers, and your financial accounts." Whitaker was trapped. The blood drained from his face. He was a judge. He knew what that meant. Harlan brought his gavel down. It is the ruling of this court that Judge Thomas Whitaker be held in federal custody, pending a full territorial trial for forgery, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. Mrs. Whitaker, this court grants you full and free custody of your child, Lily Whitaker, and a protection order against your husband, effective immediately. You are free to go." A gasp went through the courtroom. Whitaker stared, stunned, as two federal marshals took his arms. Clara stood, swaying. As the adrenaline left her, she had won. She was free. Silas was there. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He put his good arm around her, and she leaned against him, her body shaking. It was over. For now, it was over. The victory in the Denver courtroom was a clean, sharp sound, like a gavel, but the silence that followed was heavy and uncertain. Clara and Silas were free, but they were also adrift. They had no home, no money, and a future that was as blank and white as the snow they had just crossed. They spent the first weeks in the parsonage, in a small, spare room under Reverend Gideon's protection. Silas slept, his body finally safe, surrendered to its exhaustion and its wounds. The bullets were gone, but the damage was deep. He would wake in a sweat, his good hand reaching for a rifle that was not there, his eyes wild until he saw Clara, sitting in the rocker by the window, holding Lily. Then he would fall back, his breathing ragged, and sleep again. Clara tended to him. She changed his bandages. She spooned broth into his mouth. She listened to his fevered muttering, but she was tending to him differently now. It was not the frantic, desperate care of a fugitive. It was the steady, quiet work of a wife. Lily, safe from the cold, began to thrive. She was a quiet, watchful baby, her eyes following her mother around the small room. Clara would sit by the window, looking out at the bustling, noisy city of Denver. It was a foreign place. She saw women in fine dresses, men in suits. She had been one of them. Once. It felt like a lifetime ago. She had no desire to return to that world. She had fought too hard to leave it. Reverend Gideon was a good man, but he was a practical one. He understood that charity was a temporary balm, not a cure. Freedom is not a word from a judge. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said to her one evening, while Silas slept. "It is a plot of land. It is a roof you build with your own hands. You cannot stay here. This city is no place for people like you." He meant it as a compliment. "Silas is a builder," the preacher continued. "And you, I suspect, are a planter. The Lord provides the earth. The rest is up to you." He had found them a place. It was not a gift, but a chance. A small, unclaimed homestead plot, 3 miles from the mission, on the edge of the foothills. It was nothing but scrub oak, rock, and a small, clear creek. "It is hard land," Gideon warned. "We are used to hard land," Clara said. They moved in the first week of spring. The snow was receding, leaving the ground a sea of brown mud. Their first home was a canvas tent, bought with the last of the money Luke Avery had given them. It was cold, damp, and miserable, and it was the happiest place Clara had ever been. Silas, his shoulders still stiff and his side a road map of angry scars, began to build. He had his horse, Buster, and a single axe. He went to the hills and began to fell trees. He worked from sunup to sundown. His body, which had been broken by violence, was now being rebuilt by labor. The first few days, he would come back to the tent, pale and exhausted, his wounds weeping. Clara would clean them, her hands steady. "You are pushing too hard," she told him. "A man needs to work," he said, his voice grim. "A man needs to build his walls." He was not just building a house. He was building a fortress against his own past. Every log he set was a piece of the cabin he had lost, the one that had burned. He was rebuilding the life that had been stolen from him. Clara, too, worked. While he built, she cleared the land. She took his knife and his axe and she attacked the scrub oak, her hands blistering, then bleeding, then callousing. She tore the rocks from the earth, her back screaming, and piled them for a low fence. She was planting. She had traded her gold bracelet for seed in town, beans, squash, corn, and a few precious potato eyes. She dug into the hard, unforgiving soil. Her hands, once soft and white, now cracked, brown, and strong. She was no longer the judge's ornament. She was a woman of the earth. Lily grew. She learned to crawl on a blanket spread on the damp ground. She learned to pull herself up, her small hands gripping the rough canvas of the tent. She was their audience, their purpose. The house rose, log by slow log. It was just one room, like the cabin on the mountain. But Silas was building it with a care he had not used before. He built a real window frame. Not just a hole. He built a wide, deep fireplace from the river stones, one that would hold the heat. He was building for a family. He was building it to last. Months passed. The mud of spring gave way to the dry heat of summer. The walls were up. The roof was on. News from the world came rarely, usually carried by Reverend Gideon on his monthly ride. "Whitaker's trial has been delayed," he told them, sitting on a log while he shared their simple meal of rabbit stew. Silas grunted, not looking up from the door hinge he was carving. "I am surprised. He is a sick man, they say," Gideon continued, his lip curling just slightly. "His heart, he is confined to his home in redemption." "A different kind of prison," Clara said quietly. "Indeed, but his power is broken. The federal marshals have been thorough. The men he hired, the ones who were not stopped, have told their stories. The tales of his land grabs, his forgeries. The whole territory knows. He is a ruined man. He will never sit on a bench again." Clara looked at her hands, at the dirt beneath her nails. She had not hoped for his ruin. She had not hoped for his death. She had only hoped for his absence. And now, he was gone. He was a ghost, a bad memory. The last cold chain that had bound her to that old life had rusted and fallen away. Silas looked at her, reading the peace on her face. He nodded at the preacher. "Thank you for the news, Reverend." That was all. They did not celebrate. They just went back to work. Autumn came. The nights grew sharp. The corn was harvested. The beans dried. The small house was finished. It smelled of fresh-cut pine and wood smoke. They sat on the small porch Silas had built, watching the sunset, painting the foothills in shades of purple and gold. Lily was asleep inside, bundled in their cot. Silas had been quiet all day. He had been looking at his hands, turning them over, as if seeing them for the first time. They were scarred from rope and bullet, but they were strong. They were a builder's hands. Clara sat beside him, mending a tear in Lily's blanket. The silence between them was comfortable, worn as an old coat. "It is a good house," she said. "It is a box," he replied, his voice low. "It needs—" He stopped. He looked at her, his eyes clear and deep in the twilight. He had faced down bounty hunters, blizzards, and his own grief, but his hand was trembling slightly. He did not have a ring. He did not have $1 to his name, save for the few pelts he had stacked. He was not a man of property. He was not a man who could offer her silks or a fine life. He held out his hand, his calloused open palm. "I am not a man of means. Clara," he said, his voice rough. "That cabin on the mountain, that life, it is gone. All I have is this work, this land." He looked from his hand to her face. "I am not asking you to be my wife. I am asking if you will stay, if you will take this, a place by my side." Clara looked at his hand, the hand that had held her child, that had fought for her, that had built this home. She saw the scars, the dirt, the strength. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She did not cry. She did not need fancy words. She had no need for promises. She put her own hand in his. It fit perfectly. "I am already here, Silas," she said. "I am not going anywhere." He closed his hand around hers, a grip of iron and relief. They did not kiss. They just sat, holding hands, watching the last of the light fade from the sky. It was a contract. It was a vow. The first snow of the new winter came on a cold, bright morning. It was not the screaming, violent snow of their escape. It was a soft, gentle fall, a white blanket laying the world to rest. Lily was walking now. She was a year old, sturdy and bright-eyed. Silas was going to check his traps. He came out of the house, wrapped in his sheepskin coat, and saw Lily standing at the door, her hand pressed to the wood, watching the flakes fall. He smiled. He went to her and swung her up. "Come on, little one. Let's see the world." Clara watched from the doorway as he settled Lily in front of him on Buster's saddle. He did not ride. He walked the horse slowly, his boots making the first tracks in the fresh snow. He led the horse through the quiet hills behind their home. He was pointing things out, his low, rumbling voice a comfort in the stillness. "See that, Lily? That is a blue jay, meaner than he looks. And that is a deer track. She was here this morning." He was a different man. The hard, silent shell was gone. The grief was still there, a part of him, like the scars on his skin, but it no underscore longer ruled him. Buster, happy to be out, tossed his head and snorted, a loud, puffing sound in the cold air. He kicked up a small spray of snow that dusted Lily's face. She was startled. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the horse, then at Silas. And then she laughed. It was not a coo. It was not a whimper. It was a high, sudden, shocking sound, a real barking, joyful baby laugh. Silas froze. He had never heard it. He had heard her cry from hunger, from fever, from fear, but he had never heard her laugh. He stared at her, stunned. She was smiling, her small face bright, her eyes dancing. A slow, unused smile spread across Silas's own face. He could not help it. He nudged Buster again. "Do it again, boy." The horse snorted, and Lily shrieked with laughter, a peal of pure, unbroken joy that echoed in the snowy hills. Silas threw his head back and laughed. Too. It was a rough, rusty sound, a sound that had not been used in 5 years. It was the sound of a man coming back to life. That night, the house was warm. The fire Silas had built crackled in the stone hearth. The snow was falling heavily now, but it was a comfort, a wall of peace between them and the world. Clara was mending. Silas was sitting on the floor by the fire, letting Lily in her nightdress crawl over his legs and tug on his beard. He would growl, low and soft, and she would laugh that new, wonderful laugh. Clara watched them. She watched the firelight play on her husband's face, on the scarred hands that were so gentle with her daughter. She looked at the sturdy log walls, at the dried corn hanging from the rafters. She looked at her life. She had been in a cold, dark place for so long. She had forgotten what this felt like, this simple, profound warmth, this safety. "I never believed," she whispered, almost to herself, afraid to say the words too loudly, afraid to break the spell. "I never believed I could feel this love. Again, I thought he had killed it. I thought it was gone forever." Silas looked up from the floor. He heard her. He saw the tears shining in her eyes. He understood, more than any man ever could, the depth of that admission. He did not get up. He just looked at her, his gaze steady, his love a quiet, solid thing in the small room. "We made it through the night, Clara," he replied, his voice low and certain. "And every sunrise after that, I'll be right here." She smiled, a slow, real smile. Later, the fire was burning low, reduced to glowing orange embers. The house was dark and quiet. Outside, the snow was falling, a soft, silent curtain. Lily was asleep, a small, warm bundle in the cot between them. Clara lay on her side, watching the snow through the small window. Silas moved, pulling the heavy blankets up over her shoulder. He settled behind her, pulling her back against his chest. His good arm came around her, holding her close. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back. She could hear his soft, even breathing. They lay there, listening to the gentle sigh of the wind and the crackle of the embers. There was no need for words. They were no longer running. They were finally home. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment with where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts.